You're listening to episode 65 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Author, lawyer, and meditator Jeena Cho speaks with us about mindfulness for legal professionals. Many of us spend the bulk of our waking hours in a profession. This may include years of education, training, and learning about our vocation, on top of the 8+ hours we spend earning a living 5 or more days every week. It's not surprising then that a sense of community arises from the shared experiences we have with others in the same job. Situations come up that others might not understand in the same way as our colleagues understand them, simply because they live these lives too. That's one reason of many that I'm not particularly critical of applying mindfulness to a variety of contexts. How could we not? Of course, there are foundational ways to be present in any moment, in any situation, but how to communicate that to others in their own unique language, with their own unique perspective, that requires living that life. And in this case, within the context of the legal profession. Jeena Cho is a San Francisco bankruptcy attorney with JC Law Group PC. In addition to her law practice, Jeena teaches wellness, self-care techniques, and mindfulness to lawyers. She has completed multiple trainings on mindfulness-based stress reduction, as well as at Stanford's Compassion Cultivation Training course. Our guest today is Jeena Cho. Jeena, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ted, for having me.
Very glad that you're with us today, and I'd like to get us started by just having you tell us a bit about the two backgrounds you have in law and in mindfulness.
Sure. So I've been a practicing lawyer since 2004, and I started out as a prosecutor with this idea that I was going to put bad guys in jail. I was an immigrant, and our whole family came over from South Korea. And growing up, I had this feeling like, there was a lot of injustice in the world. And particularly if you come from a different country and you don't understand the language or the culture or the law, you tend to get taken advantage of a lot. So I had this deep desire to bring justice into the world. And then I started as a prosecutor. And I quickly realized that justice is very murky and that it's not nearly as cut and dry as we would like it to be. And I actually felt like, in many ways, I was sort of perpetuating the problem. So I actually shifted over and I started doing bankruptcy law, which I love because it's really one area of law where, clients come in and they're, of course, in deep distress. No one ever wants to go and meet with a bankruptcy attorney, but at the end of the day, I can help them through their very difficult financial solutions and get them debt-free so they can get a fresh start. And I find that work to be very deeply meaningful and impactful for my clients. And then I started practicing mindfulness and meditation very seriously. I guess I was always sort of occasional meditator. I started meditating when I was in law school, but about 6 years ago, I was diagnosed with social anxiety disorder. I was just having really, really bad chronic anxiety. And I just kind of assumed, well, this is just normal. But, what I noticed was that I was really starting to avoid certain contacts with people. I was really limiting my social interactions. And I was really, really stressed out. It's kind of funny when you're sort of in that really, really stressed out state. You don't realize how stressed out you are until you can kind of come out on the other end. But my now husband, boyfriend at the time, proposed, and this was back in 2008 and 2009. So you have to imagine I'm doing bankruptcy work. That was by far the busiest time we've ever had in terms of filing numbers. And I started to notice that I was losing hair, not just a little bit of hair, but clumps of hair. So I went to a doctor and he ran every test and he said, Jeena, there's nothing physically wrong with you. This is all in your head. And this is kind of a common thing for people that are really stressed. And it was really the first time I sort of started to think about this mind-body link that, what we experience mentally can have an impact on us physically, which of course sounds so common sense, but I don't know. I think a lot of lawyers really tend to overvalue our intellect, and we tend to really undervalue our body and the wisdom that it has. But the doctor suggested that I try some anti-anxiety and antidepressants. And I just intuitively felt that those were not the right solutions for me. And also I needed to have a clear head so I can do the lawyering work that I do. And I didn't want to just sort of walk through life medicated and feeling like I was sort of in this state of fog. And a good friend of mine actually told me about this program at Stanford. And she said, it's really good at treating anxiety. You should just go and check it out. So I did. And that's when I was diagnosed with social anxiety disorder. And what was interesting was that it was a study. So they were studying two different treatment options that were both known to be highly effective, cognitive behavioral therapy and then mindfulness-based stress reduction. And when the therapist told me about the two treatment options, I was like, put me in the mindfulness-based stress reduction class, because mindfulness just felt familiar to me. It was something that I had some background in. Like I mentioned, I was meditating when I was in law school. But because it was a study, you were randomly placed in one group and, you don't have a choice in the matter. So I was placed in CBT. And I think the CBT is really wonderful. And I think actually it has a lot of sort of grounding in mindfulness, because you start to really understand that your thoughts are not facts. And you also learn, cognitive distortions and thinking errors, and how our mind loves to go to the worst case scenario all the time. And you just sort of learn like, oh, that's just my mind doing its habitual thing. And then after the program, I found another mindfulness-based stress reduction class also offered at Stanford. And the class just changed my life. I got out of the class and I definitely felt much, much less stressed and anxious. But that wasn't even sort of the best part of what I got out of my class. I really felt like I was able to step into the details of my life in a way that I have never known that it was possible. I just felt like, wow, I was sort of missing all the experiences of my life. I was going through it just kind of chronically stressed, chronically anxious, and always doing and trying to get to the next thing. Like I'd wake up in the morning and I already feel like I was 22 steps behind, and I would rush through the day constantly feeling like I had to catch up. And then I would go to bed thinking, oh my gosh, there's still 52 things I have left undone. And it was just kind of letting all of that go. And you know what I'm talking about, because you're meditative too. And it just sort of added this richness to my life that I'm just so grateful for. I really started to learn like what joy is and what it feels like in my body, and just yeah. And so that's how. So I guess that's a little bit about my background and how I got to where I am.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your co-author as well, Karen Gifford.
Yeah, I met Karen actually at a happiness retreat of all things in the Bay Area, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe. And she was leading a guided meditation session there. And I remember just being so drawn to her because at the time I was really struggling with how do I keep my sanity and still practice law and still serve my clients? I felt like I wasn't doing a really good job at it because there was just so much self-sacrifice I was making in the name of serving my clients. And, I remember just sort of going up to her and be like, you're a lawyer and you seem so happy and you seem so grounded. And you're like, what's your secret? I want to know. And she shared her story about how she used to be a totally stressed out, anxious lawyer. She worked at the feds in New York, and, she was prosecuting these bankers and, people that did trades and things like that. And she worked at the feds. And she said she really started practicing meditation and mindfulness because she too needed a way to cope with the difficulties of her life. And she was a mom and she had young children. And so that's how I got connected to her. And then when this opportunity to write the book came up, I reached out to her, and it just made sense for us to co-write the book together because she has many, many decades of meditation practice, whereas I'm I guess a fairly new practitioner. So it kind of gave two different perspectives, two different angles, two sets of stories on how to kind of take these tools and apply it in our day-to-day legal practice.
So tell us a little bit more about that story of writing the book. What prompted you to partner with Karen and write it?
I guess to back up a little bit, I think how the book sort of came about is an interesting story too, because the American Bar Association actually reached out to me to write a book on mindfulness and meditation. And, when I sort of look back on that, it almost kind of seems like destiny, or I don't know, just like one of those like life synchronicities, because I was a closeted meditator for many, many years. I took that class at Stanford, and for years, I didn't tell people that I was meditating or practicing mindfulness, but somehow I think on Twitter or something, I had mentioned that I was practicing meditation. And then this writer for an online blog called The Lawyerist reached out to me and said, I want to write a story about you and your mindfulness practice. And I was like, okay. And so he ran a story titled The Zen Lawyer or something like that. And then just like it's through like some very random set of circumstances, the ABA ended up reaching out to me. And actually, when I talked to the editor on the phone, I was not expecting him to ask me to write a book. He was based in Chicago and he was coming out to San Francisco for the ABA conference. And at the end of our conversation, he said, so do you have a book proposal for me? And I was like, what? I was not expecting that. This was not a call to talk about a book proposal. It was more of a call to set up a time for us to meet. And when he asked that question, the words that flew out of my mouth was, yes, I want to write a book titled The Anxious Lawyer, and I want to talk about mindfulness and meditation for lawyers. And as the words were flying out of my mouth, I wanted to grab them and take it back because I was like, wait, like you're going to out yourself. Like you can't say that. People are going to think you're a complete freak. Like, what lawyers meditate? That's unheard of. But I really just felt like compelled to do it. I feel so compelled to do this work, to help lawyers see that there is a better way of practicing law, that mindfulness and meditation can actually help you be a happier, saner, more joyful lawyer. So that's how the book came about, and it took almost 2 years to write it. Initially I really struggled a lot with this, the inner critic and the saboteur that said, who do you think you are? You've only been meditating seriously for, and I guess at the time, maybe 4 years. And you're not an expert. You're no John Kabat-Zinn, you're not Jack Kornfield. You didn't live in India for 10 years and live in an ashram and And I had just like really deep fears, like, what if the book comes out and no one buys it? What if the book comes out and everyone hates it? So I really just had to struggle through that, like morning after morning, I would just sit with that feeling of not being enough, not knowing enough, not being good enough until, just something kind of loosened up and I was able to start writing. And really the thing that helped me through it was just telling myself your job every day is to get up and write. Like your job is not to think about whether the book is going to be successful or unsuccessful because that's not up to you, right? And I think that's such a foundational thing that we learn in our mindfulness practice is that we can only show up and do our best, but the outcome is never up to us.
Not attaching to results of things it's very difficult in a goal-oriented society. And I imagine that you've run into that in your practice as a lawyer, that there are goals that we tend to strive for. And that's another thing that is something of a buzzword for mindfulness meditators.
Oh, of course, right. And clients pay me to deliver a certain result, and oftentimes, and especially if you're like a litigator, I mean, often, the ultimate decision's never up to you. It's up to the judge or the fact finder. And at the end of the day, you have 50-50 chance of losing.
So let's talk about the book itself. What's in there? What did you put in the structure of this book to help lawyers realize, yes, you can meditate. It can be helpful to you?
Yeah, so Karen and I really wanted to write a sort of a no-nonsense, very approachable and practical book on mindfulness and meditation. So a lot of it is stories from our own life, dealing with difficulties, dealing with difficult clients, dealing with struggles and losses, and using the tools of mindfulness and meditation to kind of gain clarity and help us figure out what's the most skillful way of navigating these sets of skills. And each week there's a theme. So, we talk about things like clarity, and there's a formal practice and an informal practice each week. And we also spend a lot of time talking about something that I think a lot of lawyers fear, which is compassion. Actually, I take that back. I think that's something that we all fear on many levels. But, this idea of having compassion for yourself. And I think one thing that often as people that provide services for others and really care for others that are suffering is that we sort of lose ourselves in the picture. So we spend a lot of time talking about this idea that being with a client that's suffering is painful and it's difficult, not only for the client, but also for you as the attorney. And how do you be with that difficulty, and how do you allow for that there are certain things that law cannot fix, and we may be able to get financial compensation for someone whose loved one was wrongfully injured or killed, but we can never bring that person back. So kind of understanding our own limitations, the limitations of our justice system, and also, compassion towards others. I think in law, there's this sense that we see the opposing counsel as, when we call them adversaries, but that they're more than adversaries, that they're also part of this system that we call, our legal system, that they're actually our sisters and brothers in this community of lawyers. And what does that look like to be compassionate towards your opposing counsel and his or her client? And can we see them as not being these evil people that we have to crush at all costs, but can we see them as just being part of this larger picture, and that they're doing their job and that they're doing their best given the circumstances and the tools that are available to them, and we are too. And and can we have compassion for them as well?
As people question that a little bit more, we see in currently the political arena where there's a lot of aggressive behavior towards one's opponent. And what I find most inspiring is those unfortunately rare moments where one candidate will come to the sincere defense of someone else when they're being wrongfully attacked or accused. I think of John McCain years ago when confronted by someone at one of his rallies making an accusation about Barack Obama, and I had great respect for John McCain in that moment in correcting the individual and their misunderstanding with kindness. He was expressing care with that individual. And to me, that was one of the most wonderful, shining human moments of someone with whom politically I happen to disagree. And how wonderful, what would it be like if there were more of that?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think particularly in the legal system, there is this sort of lack of maybe humanity. And I think, that's what really we need more of. We just see just so much of the dysfunctions, particularly in our criminal justice system, where we don't even see them as humans, as our fellow human beings, how we punish people and really kind of getting to the nuances of well, what exactly is justice and what is just in this particular situation? And, can we take a moment to really pause to understand why he or she did the thing that he or she did? And, and can this actually serve as an opportunity for reconciliation and for mutual understanding and for healing rather than being this destructive force? And I often feel like the law is just used in this very destructive way that's, it just doesn't help anyone.
So what were some things that you may have learned, perhaps some aha moments while writing the book?
Really being committed to the word that I'm writing. I think kind of what I said earlier. And also just, and I think Stephen King said this in one of his books, and he said, a job of a writer is to write about what you know and to tell the truth. And so, I had to actually write about things that I knew would be perhaps controversial. Just even something like having compassion for your opposing counsel and his clients is controversial, I think, to a lot of lawyers because, if you think about our justice system, it sort of evolved out of a system where people used to resolve disputes by entering into a duel. Like we used to literally pull out our gun and shoot each other. And that's how we were resolving conflict. And at some point, someone decided, maybe that's not such a great way of resolving conflict. And so we have now these sets of rules and we have court systems. But there is that kind of residual sense that when a client hires an attorney, they're hiring a hired gun. And what does sort of the new evolution of law look like? And can we bring these ideas that I mentioned earlier, like compassion and forgiveness, into our justice system? So at the end of the day, I often find that even when the client wins, it's sort of a hollow victory, because someone's going to write you a check for a lot of money, but I think oftentimes what the client really wants is, an apology, or they want to just have, be able to sit down with the quote unquote, the offender and just understand how this thing could have happened. And so, really kind of rethinking our legal system as a whole. And, just interesting things that I noticed about writing the book, for a long, long time, I felt very protective of the book. I had a lot of hesitancy around even sharing it with other people. And of course, I had a co-author and we were sharing the work back and forth, but even sharing it with our editor, I just didn't, it was like my baby, and I didn't want to share it because I felt like I had to protect it. And then at some point that sort of lost its grip, and I was ready, and I had this sense okay, well, this book is now its own independent thing, aside from me. Yes, I wrote it, but now the book is going to go out there in the world and do its own thing. And that thing that it does is not really up to me to decide. I hope and I pray and, it's my deepest intention that it be of service to attorneys and that the attorneys will benefit from it. But, that's not up to me either. Right?
It needs to make its own way in the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I wasn't expecting that. That was a really interesting insight that I gained, and just having a little bit of distance from the work, I think, is probably mentally healthy.
Well, let's shift a little bit. I also want to talk about your Resilient Lawyer podcast. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so as I was writing the book and I was talking to other attorneys that also practice mindfulness and meditation, and it was just meeting these really, really interesting lawyers. Like it was almost like once I took off the blinders and freed myself from this idea that I have to be a lawyer and lawyers only look like this sort of carbon, print or like a cookie cutter. I realized that there are lots of attorneys that are practicing law in radically different ways than how we traditionally think about lawyers. And there are lawyers that are doing conscious contracting where you're really deeply listening to the needs of each other and trying to find a contract that's fair to both sides rather than trying to write the contract so that all the benefits are on you and all the potential negative things are on the other party. And just really, like attorneys that are practicing law in a way that's really authentic to them, where they can bring their whole selves into their law practice, that they're not one person when they're at the office and they're somebody completely different when they're at home. And it kind of saddened me actually, because I would meet other lawyers and they would be like, oh, I hate practicing law and I hate the way that I practice law. And I wanted to be like, but there are different ways. There are different templates. And, you just have to sort of free yourself from this idea that a lawyer has to look this particular way and has to practice in this particular manner. So it was just sort of a natural evolution of that desire to want to build a platform for spreading this idea that you can be your whole authentic self and still be a lawyer in the world.
Beautifully said. So for those who are interested in finding out more, you can go to the website theanxiouslawyer.com. And of course, I'll be linking that on the episode page for this episode, as well as finding links for the book, The Anxious Lawyer. Our guest today, Jeena Cho. Jeena, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you, Ted.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.